For several long seconds, the entire academy remained frozen in silence. Even the breeze that had been moving through the courtyard seemed to stop. Everyone stared at the countless skeleton mages standing behind Wei Chiao, unable to believe that the same boy they had laughed at only moments ago had filled the platform with an undead army. The students who had been mocking him slowly lowered their heads, while others exchanged uneasy glances. One skeleton might be worthless, but dozens appearing almost instantly was a completely different story. The principal's eyes lit up as he finally understood why the heavens had created such an enormous awakening phenomenon. This hidden class wasn't designed to rely on one overwhelmingly powerful summon. Its true strength was numbers, endless numbers. Standing proudly before his undead army, Wei Chiao smiled to himself. He didn't need to argue with anyone anymore. Sometimes actions were far louder than words. One arrogant student still refused to accept reality and shouted that the skeletons were only weak cannon fodder. What's the point of having so many if every single one breaks with one hit? Several nearby students quickly nodded, convincing themselves that Wei Chiao's army was nothing but a flashy illusion. Hearing the challenge, the principal decided to test the theory personally. He ordered several instructors to evaluate the summons carefully. One teacher stepped forward and destroyed the first skeleton with a casual strike. Just as expected, it shattered immediately. The crowd regained some confidence and laughter slowly returned. But before they could continue mocking him, another skeleton calmly walked forward and occupied the empty space. Then another moved into formation. The line instantly repaired itself as though nothing had happened. The instructors frowned. They continued destroying skeletons one after another, yet every time one disappeared, another immediately replaced it. Within a minute, dozens of broken bones covered the ground, but the size of Wei Chiao's army hadn't decreased at all. The atmosphere became strangely tense. Several students finally realized the terrifying truth. If Wei Chiao's spirit continued increasing as he leveled up, then his army would also continue expanding. An ordinary warrior eventually became exhausted after prolonged combat. A mage would eventually run out of mana. But an undead army could slowly overwhelm enemies through pure numbers alone. Even if each skeleton was weak individually, facing hundreds or even thousands without rest would become a nightmare. The principal couldn't help smiling. Excellent, he muttered quietly. This hidden class has far greater potential than I imagined. Even Shu Xiaoqing's confident expression changed slightly. At first, she believed victory over Wei Chiao would be effortless. But after seeing the endless summons appear one after another, she realized this wasn't a battle that could be judged by appearances alone. She crossed her arms and carefully observed every movement of the skeletons. Their individual strength wasn't impressive, but they obeyed every command instantly. Their formation remained disciplined, and not one moved unnecessarily. That level of control was unusual for someone who had awakened only minutes earlier. Deep inside, she admitted something she would never say aloud. If Wei Chiao continued growing at this pace, he would become an opponent worthy of taking seriously. Meanwhile, the students continued whispering among themselves. Do hidden classes always work like this? I've never heard of someone summoning this many creatures. Is there even a limit? Nobody knew the answer. Hidden classes were so rare that most teachers had only read about them in ancient records. Even the academy library contained almost no detailed information. Suddenly, one student nervously asked, "What happens if he reaches a high level?" Nobody answered because everyone had already imagined the same terrifying possibility. If this army continued growing every time Wei Chiao became stronger, then one day he might command an entire battlefield by himself. Wei Chiao looked behind him and counted the skeletons with satisfaction. Although they appeared ordinary, he understood something nobody else realized. These weren't temporary summons that would remain weak forever. According to his skill description, every skeleton would evolve together with him. That meant today's fragile skeleton mage might eventually become tomorrow's terrifying undead general. The thought alone made his heart race with excitement. However, he kept those thoughts hidden. Revealing every secret on the first day would be foolish. The principal eventually raised his hand, signaling everyone to calm down. "That is enough," he announced. "Wei Chiao has successfully demonstrated his awakened class." The skeleton army instantly dissolved into countless particles of purple light before disappearing completely. The academy courtyard returned to normal, but the shock remained on everyone's faces. Even after the summons vanished, students continued staring at the empty space where the army had stood only moments earlier. It felt almost unreal. Just minutes ago, Wei Chiao had gone from being the academy's biggest joke to becoming its greatest mystery. As he stepped down from the platform, he quietly reviewed everything that had happened during the awakening. The mysterious vision still lingered in his memory. While everyone else had seen only skeletons filling the sky, Wei Chiao had witnessed something far greater. Hidden within that endless army stood enormous undead beings whose existence seemed capable of shaking heaven itself. Towering skeletal giants carried mountains on their shoulders. Ghostly knights rode nightmare beasts surrounded by black lightning. In the distance, an enormous dragon made entirely of white bones spread wings. Large enough to cover the sky. Its empty eye sockets burned with violet flames that seemed capable of freezing souls. Although the vision had lasted only a brief moment, Wei Chiao would never forget it. Somehow, he instinctively knew those creatures weren't random illusions. They represented the ultimate future of his class. One day, every terrifying undead creature he had witnessed could become part of his own legion. That single possibility filled him with determination. "Just wait," he thought quietly. "One day I'll summon every one of you." At the edge of the crowd, Shu Xiaoqing glanced toward him one last time before leaving. She had won today's comparison in everyone's eyes, yet strangely, she didn't feel completely satisfied. Something about Wei Chiao's confidence bothered her. Most people would have become embarrassed after being laughed at by the entire academy. Instead, he looked calmer than ever. It was almost as though he had already seen a future nobody else could imagine. Watching him disappear into the crowd, Xiaoqing unconsciously smiled before immediately hiding the expression. "Next time," she whispered to herself. "We'll settle this properly." Unaware of her thoughts, Wei Chiao simply walked away while gently spinning the golden shovel in his hand. Every student who had laughed at it still believed it was nothing more than an unusual weapon. Only Wei Chiao knew that this strange shovel might become one of the greatest treasures he had ever obtained. Sometimes the strongest abilities arrived wrapped inside the most ordinary appearances. And in this world, underestimating someone because of appearances alone was often the fastest way to lose everything. Wei Chiao had barely left the academy courtyard when he noticed something strange. Every skeleton he had summoned had vanished exactly as expected, except one. It stood beneath the shadow of an old cedar tree at the edge of the campus, perfectly motionless. At first he assumed his eyes were playing tricks on him. He blinked once, then twice. The skeleton was still there, staring directly at him with two faint violet flames burning inside its empty eye sockets. Nobody else seemed to notice it. Students walked past without reacting, as if the creature simply didn't exist. A chill ran down Wei Chiao's spine. "Why are you still here?" he whispered. The skeleton slowly raised one bony finger and pointed toward the ancient shovel hanging from his waist. Before he could react, the purple glow inside its skull flickered once, and the skeleton silently crumbled into dust. The wind scattered the ashes across the stone path, leaving behind only a single black coin engraved with an unfamiliar symbol. Wei Chiao picked it up carefully. The moment his fingers touched the coin, a cold voice echoed inside his mind. "Hidden objective discovered. The Gravekeeper's legacy has acknowledged its first successor." The message vanished before he could read anything else. No status screen. No explanation. Just silence. "What was that?" he muttered. Even his system interface showed nothing unusual. It was as though the message had never appeared. For the first time since awakening, Wei Chiao realized there might be secrets hidden even from the system itself. As he slipped the coin into his pocket, he failed to notice an elderly groundskeeper watching him from across the academy. The old man had spent decades sweeping the same stone paths. Most students barely remembered his face. Yet the moment he saw the black coin, the broom fell from his hands. His expression changed from boredom to absolute disbelief. "Impossible," he whispered. "That symbol disappeared hundreds of years ago." Without another word, the old man quietly turned around and walked away. But instead of returning to the storage shed, he disappeared into a restricted area beneath the academy that no ordinary student even knew existed. Deep underground, hidden behind enormous iron doors covered in ancient runes, rested a chamber that had remained sealed for generations. At its center stood a weathered stone tablet with thousands of names carved across its surface. Every name belonged to a legendary warrior who had vanished from history. The old man approached the tablet and placed his trembling hand upon it. A second later, a faint crack spread across the stone. One forgotten name slowly began glowing with purple light. The old man's breathing became uneven. "He's returned," he whispered. "After all these centuries, the gravekeeper has chosen another heir." Meanwhile, Wei Chiao knew nothing about the strange events unfolding beneath the academy. His thoughts remained focused on the shovel. Ever since touching the mysterious coin, the weapon felt slightly heavier, almost as if something inside it had awakened. Curious, he examined it again. The familiar description appeared, but this time a single sentence had been added beneath the sealed abilities. Condition met. First seal, 1%. He frowned. Yesterday there had been no mention of seals at all. "So you're hiding more than you showed me," he said quietly while looking at the shovel. Before he could investigate further, footsteps approached from behind. Interesting weapon. Wei Chiao turned immediately. Standing several meters away was a man dressed in a long black coat. His face remained hidden beneath a wide hood, making it impossible to judge his age. The stranger smiled faintly. "Most people see an ordinary shovel," he said. "I wonder, what do you see?" Every instinct told Wei Chiao not to answer. Instead, he asked, "Who are you?" The hooded man laughed softly. "Just someone who has been waiting for a very long..." Without warning, he tossed a small metal token toward Wei Chiao. It landed neatly in his hand. On one side was the image of a crow. On the other was a single sentence. "When the dead begin remembering their names, find the city where bells never ring." Wei Chiao looked up only a second later. The man was gone. There were no footsteps, no movement, not even a trace of spiritual energy. It was as though he had never existed. A strange feeling settled over him. Until this morning, his biggest concern had been awakening a useful class. Now mysterious strangers knew his secrets, hidden messages appeared inside his mind, forgotten relics responded to his presence, and ancient seals had begun unlocking for reasons he didn't understand. Whatever path he had stepped onto, it was clearly much larger than a simple academy life. And somewhere far beyond the city walls, someone, or something, had already begun searching for him. Wei Chiao stood frozen for several seconds, staring at the strange token resting in his palm. The words engraved across its surface refused to leave his mind. "When the dead begin remembering their names, find the city where bells never ring." It sounded less like a clue and more like a warning. Before he could think any further, the token suddenly became scorching hot. He instinctively released it, but instead of falling to the ground, it dissolved into countless black particles that disappeared into his shadow. His status window remained completely unchanged. No notification. No explanation. It was as if the system itself was deliberately hiding something from him. "So even the system has blind spots," Wei Chiao murmured. That single realization was more terrifying than any monster he had ever studied. Trying to clear his thoughts, he returned to the academy dormitory. The celebration outside continued long into the evening. Students were still arguing about the awakening ceremony. Some insisted Shu Xiaoqing would become the empire's greatest holy knight. Others believed Wei Chiao's hidden class would either become legendary or destroy itself before graduation. Nobody could agree on which future was more likely. Yet while everyone argued, Wei Chiao quietly closed his room door and locked it. He had no interest in proving himself today. What he wanted was answers. He placed the golden shovel on the table and carefully examined every inch of it under the candlelight. At first glance it still looked ordinary. There were scratches on the blade, faded engravings along the handle, and patches of rust that seemed completely out of place for a soul-bound weapon. But when he brushed away years of dirt near the bottom of the handle, his breathing suddenly stopped. Hidden beneath the rust was an ancient inscription written in a language that should no longer exist. Strangely enough, the moment he looked at the symbols, he somehow understood every word. Only those abandoned by fate may command the forgotten. A cold sensation traveled down his spine. Before he could process the sentence, the room suddenly became unnaturally quiet. The sounds outside vanished. The laughter of students disappeared. Even the wind stopped moving. Then came 3 slow knocks against the wooden door. Knock. 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 Wei Chiao frowned. Who is it? No answer. He slowly approached the door and opened it. The hallway was completely empty. Not a single student. Not a single teacher. Only darkness stretching endlessly in both directions. His heart began pounding. Something wasn't right. He took one cautious step into the hallway. The instant his foot touched the floor, the academy around him disappeared. He found himself standing inside an endless gray cemetery beneath a blood-red moon. Thousands, no, millions of weathered gravestones stretched across the horizon. Every grave carried the same symbol engraved on the mysterious black coin. Before Wei Chiao could react, footsteps echoed behind him. He turned slowly. An army of skeletons stood silently in perfect formation. Unlike the fragile skeleton mages he had summoned earlier, these warriors wore ancient armor covered in battle scars. Their empty eye sockets burned with ghostly blue flames, and every one of them knelt on one knee the moment they saw him. Not a single skeleton raised its weapon. Not one made a threatening move. Instead, they all lowered their heads in absolute respect. A deep voice echoed across the cemetery. We have waited, another voice answered from somewhere among the endless graves. For our king. Wei Chiao instinctively stepped backward. I'm not your king. Silence. Then every skeleton slowly lifted its head at exactly the same moment. One of them removed its cracked helmet. The face beneath wasn't a skull. It was human. More terrifying still, the face was identical to Wei Chiao's. Before he could even breathe, thousands of helmets came off together. Every single warrior wore his face. Older versions. Younger versions. Scarred versions. Some smiled. Some cried. Some looked completely emotionless. All of them stared directly at him. The cemetery shook violently. The ground beneath his feet split open as an enormous stone throne slowly rose from the earth. Carved across its back were countless names. One name had just begun glowing. Wei Chiao. A voice older than time whispered beside his ear. You are not the first Wei Chiao. You are the last. Before he could ask what that meant, the entire cemetery shattered like broken glass. Wei Chiao suddenly woke up on the floor of his dormitory, breathing heavily. The candle was still burning. The shovel remained on the table. Everything looked completely normal. For several minutes, he convinced himself it had only been a nightmare. Then something tapped against the window. Tap. 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 He slowly turned his head. Standing outside on the windowsill of the 3rd floor was the same skeleton with the violet eyes. Only this time, it wasn't alone. Behind it, the darkness outside the academy was filled with thousands of identical glowing eyes silently watching his room.